Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because Jordan Peterson's final revelation about the moment when narcissistic denial completely and utterly fails will fundamentally change how you understand the ultimate limits of human self-deception and why some people's psychological structures are destined for total collapse. This isn't about gradual awareness or therapeutic breakthrough. This is about the catastrophic moment when decades of carefully constructed lies simply cannot be maintained anymore. When every defense mechanism fails simultaneously. When reality crashes through their psychological barriers with such overwhelming force that it destroys the very foundation of their identity. What Peterson discovered about this ultimate breakdown will shock you about the fragility of the human psyche when it's built entirely on falsehood, and why this collapse, when it comes, is both inevitable and absolutely devastating. If you want to understand what's really happening inside the mind of a narcissist when the mask falls, subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment down below if you already suspected that one day this collapse would happen. The failure of narcissistic denial is not like the failure of normal psychological defenses. When healthy people's denial breaks down, they gradually adjust to reality and find ways to cope with difficult truths. Peterson, drawing on profound understanding of personality psychology and decades of clinical observation, discovered that narcissistic denial is so fundamental to their psychological functioning that when it fails, it doesn't just cause distress, it causes complete identity dissolution. Imagine for a moment that your entire sense of self, every memory you have, every relationship you value, every achievement you're proud of, was built on a foundation of lies so elaborate that when the truth emerged, nothing, absolutely nothing, of who you thought you were could survive. This is what Peterson calls existential annihilation through truth, when reality becomes so undeniable that accepting it literally destroys your psychological existence. Peterson discovered that narcissists don't just use denial as a coping mechanism, they use it as the primary structural element of their personality. Their denial isn't protecting them from uncomfortable truths. It's the foundation upon which their entire identity is constructed. When that foundation crumbles, everything built on top of it collapses simultaneously. But can you imagine the psychological terror of realizing that every relationship you valued was based on manipulation? Every success you achieved was built on destroying others. Every moment of happiness you experienced came from someone else's suffering. According to recent studies in neuropsychology, when narcissists experience complete denial failure, the brain enters a state similar to what happens during severe trauma, except the trauma is the sudden, overwhelming confrontation with their own truth. It's like someone who has been living in a virtual reality simulation their entire life, suddenly having the simulation shut down and discovering they've been in a prison cell the whole time. The shock isn't just about the deception. It's about realizing that everything they thought was real was completely false. And then, denial fails completely and catastrophically. Peterson describes this moment as the most psychologically devastating experience he has ever witnessed in his clinical practice. It's not just the breakdown of specific beliefs or attitudes, it's the complete collapse of the psychological structure that made coherent identity possible. When narcissistic denial fails, it fails totally and irreversibly. The first stage of denial failure, which Peterson calls reality saturation, occurs when the narcissist is presented with so much contradictory evidence from so many independent sources that their denial mechanisms simply cannot process or deflect the information. It's like trying to hold back a tsunami. With a screen door, the volume of truth becomes so overwhelming that resistance becomes impossible. Peterson documented cases where this reality saturation occurs when multiple family members, colleagues, legal authorities, and medical professionals all simultaneously present coordinated evidence of the narcissist's destructive behavior patterns. When the evidence comes from every direction at once, even the most sophisticated denial systems cannot function. But what makes denial failure particularly catastrophic for narcissists is that they have no psychological backup systems. Healthy people maintain some connection to reality even while using defense mechanisms. So when those mechanisms fail, they can still function. Narcissists have replaced reality entirely with denial, so when denial fails, they have nothing left to stand on psychologically. Can narcissists recognize when their denial is beginning to fail, or does it happen too quickly for conscious awareness? Peterson's research reveals that most experience denial failure as a sudden, unexpected catastrophe. They may notice increased difficulty maintaining their narratives, but they typically don't understand that their entire psychological structure is about to collapse. It's like someone living in a house that's been gradually sinking into the ground for decades, suddenly having the foundation give way completely. The collapse feels sudden and unexpected, even though it was building for years. Can you imagine the moment when you realize that every story you've told yourself about who you are has been revealed to be false, and you have no alternative story to fall back on? Peterson explains that this is why denial failure in narcissists is so devastating. They haven't been managing difficult truths. They've been replacing reality entirely. Leave in the comments if you've witnessed someone experiencing what seemed like sudden, complete psychological collapse when confronted with undeniable truth about themselves. The second stage, which Peterson calls identity void, occurs when narcissists realize that without their denial systems, they have no coherent sense of who they are. They don't discover an authentic self beneath the false one. They discover that there is no self at all. Just a collection of reactions and manipulations with no core. Identity. Peterson discovered that narcissists in this stage often describe feeling like they don't exist or are completely empty inside. This isn't depression or sadness, it's the literal experience of having no stable sense of personal identity. They look for themselves psychologically and find nothing there. It's like opening a beautifully wrapped gift and discovering it's completely empty, except in this case, the gift is your own sense of self, and the emptiness is absolute and terrifying. But what happens when narcissists confront this identity void will shock you profoundly. Peterson revealed that many develop what he calls existence panic, a terror so profound that it stems not from fear of death, but from the realization that they may never have truly been alive in any authentic sense. They begin to question whether any of their experiences were real, whether they ever felt genuine emotions, whether they ever had authentic relationships with anyone. It's an existential crisis so severe that it can lead to complete dissociation from reality. And here's the most terrifying part. According to Peterson, some narcissists experiencing denial failure and identity void develop what he calls reality rejection psychosis, a complete break from consensus reality where they become convinced that the evidence of their destructive behavior was fabricated, that their memories have been artificially implanted, that they are victims of an elaborate conspiracy. Rather than accepting that their denial has failed and their identity was false, they retreat into delusions that allow them to maintain some version of their grandiose self-image. It's the mind's final, desperate attempt to avoid complete psychological annihilation. Can you imagine preferring insanity to accepting the truth about yourself? Peterson describes this as perhaps the most extreme form of psychological self-protection he has ever encountered, choosing madness over reality when reality becomes unbearable. But let me tell you something that will completely change your perspective on narcissistic breakdown. According to Peterson's research, there is a crucial difference between narcissists whose denial failure leads to complete psychological destruction and those who somehow manage to survive the collapse and begin genuine reconstruction. The difference lies in what Peterson calls void tolerance, the extraordinary psychological capacity to exist without coherent identity while slowly, authentically building a new sense of self from nothing. It requires the ability to tolerate complete uncertainty about who you are while learning to function without the psychological crutches that have supported you for decades. Peterson argues that this capacity is so rare that most narcissists simply cannot survive denial failure without fragmenting completely. The psychological skills required to rebuild authentic identity from complete emptiness are not skills that narcissistic personality development typically creates. And then arises the ultimate question: is it ethical to force someone to confront truths that may destroy them psychologically? Peterson, with his deeply pragmatic but humane perspective, suggests that sometimes the answer is yes, when the alternative is allowing them to continue systematically, harming others through their delusional behavior patterns. But he also acknowledges that witnessing someone's complete psychological annihilation, even when it's necessary and inevitable, can be traumatic for everyone involved. Denial failure in narcissists isn't just personal tragedy. It affects every relationship and system they were part of. But here's something that will leave you completely disturbed. Peterson revealed that even narcissists, who appear to experience genuine denial, failure, and identity collapse, often find ways to reconstruct new forms of narcissism from the ruins of their breakdown. They become the broken narcissist who gains attention and sympathy for their psychological collapse, who uses their apparent vulnerability and honesty about their emptiness as a new form of manipulation. It's narcissism rebuilt from the ashes of narcissism, often more sophisticated and harder to detect than the original. Peterson describes this as phoenix narcissism, narcissism that rises from the complete destruction of the previous narcissistic structure, incorporating the language of breakdown and reconstruction while maintaining the fundamental need for external validation and control. Leave down below what you think. Can a narcissist experience genuine, complete denial, failure, and identity collapse without eventually reconstructing some form of narcissistic structure? Peterson's answer is cautiously pessimistic. He documents extraordinarily rare cases where narcissists, after complete denial, failure, and identity void, manage to build entirely new personalities based on authentic self-knowledge and genuine empathy. But this reconstruction takes years or decades and requires psychological resources that most narcissists simply don't possess. The vast majority either fragment permanently, retreat into delusion, or rebuild more sophisticated versions of their original narcissistic patterns. True transformation after complete denial failure is possible, but extraordinarily uncommon. And here's something that no one tells you about narcissistic denial failure. It often occurs when their victims least expect it and may not provide the satisfaction or closure that victims hope for. The breakdown may come decades after the primary harm was done, or may result in behavior that is even more difficult to deal with than their original narcissism. Peterson frequently works with families, helping them understand that their healing cannot depend on witnessing or benefiting from the narcissist's ultimate breakdown. The collapse, when it comes, is about the narcissist's internal psychological processes, not about justice or resolution for those who were harmed. What you're going to discover now will transform your understanding of psychological justice and personal responsibility. Peterson revealed that denial failure in narcissists teaches us that some people's entire existence is built on such fundamental lies that confronting truth literally destroys them as psychological beings. This isn't about moral judgment or cosmic justice. It's about the natural consequences of building identity on falsehood for extended periods. Just as physical structures built on false foundations will eventually collapse under their own weight, psychological structures built on denial will eventually crumble when confronted with undeniable reality. The ultimate lesson isn't about waiting for their denial to fail or hoping for their breakdown. It's about understanding that their psychological trajectory is independent of your healing journey. Their denial failure, when it comes, is about their relationship with reality, not about validation for your experience of their abuse. Peterson also warns about something profound. Our contemporary society may be creating conditions that prevent healthy denial failure while making ultimate breakdown even more catastrophic when it finally occurs. Social media echo chambers, political polarization, and therapeutic cultures that avoid confrontation all enable narcissists to maintain elaborate denial systems. Longer than ever before, and here's the final truth that will reshape your understanding of human psychology. Narcissistic denial failure reveals that some people's connection to reality is so tenuous that when it breaks, it cannot be repaired. Not everyone can be healed. Not everyone can grow. Not everyone can change, even when confronted with absolute truth about themselves. The ultimate wisdom lies in building your life, your healing, and your sense of justice in ways that are completely independent of whether narcissists in your life ever experience denial failure or psychological breakdown. Their relationship with reality is their journey, not yours. Real psychological freedom emerges when you understand that you don't need their denial to fail for your truth to be valid. You don't need their breakdown for your healing to be complete. You don't need their psychological collapse for your life to have meaning and peace, because true strength comes not from witnessing others' destruction when confronted with reality, but from building your own life on such solid foundations of truth, authentic relationship, and genuine self-knowledge that their chaos, whether they live in denial or experience complete breakdown, becomes irrelevant to your continued growth and well-being. If you've made it through this entire series, you now understand something profound about human psychology. Some people's psychological structures are so fundamentally flawed that they will inevitably collapse when confronted with reality. But your healing, your growth, and your peace don't depend on witnessing that collapse. They depend on building your own psychological foundation so solid that it remains stable, regardless of the chaos around you. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the darkest aspects of human psychology. The goal wasn't to teach you to hate or judge narcissists, but to understand them clearly enough to protect yourself and build a life that doesn't depend on their capacity for change, growth, or connection to reality. That understanding is the greatest gift you can give yourself.